Your mic level is quite low.
Yeah, we hardly hear you,
I will
Shabaka.
fix that now.
Right.
Just make the volume.
Fix that, Steve. Can't go buffet,
Mm-hmm. And you don't want to get
Can't
book from
entertain
me.
that, All right. He will chastise you urgently.
Take it up to like 80, 85.
85. Let's
Yeah,
see.
directions.
How is that? Better?
It's better.
It's better. All right, carry it up to 95.
How are we doing there?
We're getting better.
Yeah, that's fine.
We can work
We're
with
just
that.
waiting up to Andrew and don't worry with
We'll
Stephen
do that,
stress
we'll
on
do
yourself. So,
It looks like you guys are looking to have some fun today.
oh, yeah, always.
We have fun all the time.
Are
Life
you,
is too
are you
stressful.
seeing our poll question on the screen?
Well, this is how it becomes clear that we're in the mood for some entertainment.
Why are you calling our poll entertainment? Would you care to proffer an answer to our poll, Mr. Kambon?
Well, yes. Look at that. You all let this man get you all involved in some political mischief.
Did Shabaka say yes to the poll?
No, I didn't.
What is your answer? Would you agree with that suggestion, Shabaka?
Would I agree with Dr. Tilak Singh's suggestion? Have you asked Dr. Tilak Singh if that's a serious suggestion?
Wow.
That's the answer right
Let me move that question from. Thank you for joining us this morning. Now you are part of the Caribbean Committee on what's the committee called?
No. I am not part of the government committee. I am part of the Caribbean Freedom Project, which introduced the
Caribbean
idea.
Freedom Project. That's what I was trying to say. Caribbean Freedom Project.
Yeah,
and
we have.
What's that? Just give us some context as to what that project is meant to do.
Well, in a nutshell, right now, I am sitting down in front of a document called Confronting the Past to Free the Future. It is a civil society report on national monuments, memorials, markers, signs, and symbols that glorify colonial violence, racism, and white supremacy. Among the monuments, signs, symbols, etc., that have been highlighted in this document is the coat of arms, and this document was produced by a collection of Trinidad luminaries. Sorry, pardon me.
Bless you.
We have Dr. Claudius Fergus, Dr. Carol Boyce Davies, Sister Zakia Wadada, Puelintu Springer, Dr. Tahimba Salandi, Dr. Dominic Kalipasad, Brother Rodney Piggott from Tobago, Brother Shabaka Kambon, Mr. Ato Osei from South, an artist and musician and painter, Shaman Raul Keith Simon of the Warao Elders Council of San Fernando, and Donna Bermudez, the Cacica of the Warao Nation of Trinidad and Tobago, and of course the late Professor Brinsley Samuel. All these people would have met over the last 2 years before Brinsley passed away to develop this document, to look for the people and values that we celebrate in our place, to look critically at the people and values that we celebrate in our public spaces. And of course, in July 2020 or 2021, let me make sure I have the dates right here, my friends. I think it's 2021. We would have petitioned 2020, July 2020, just before Parliament closed, we petitioned the government successfully, the Parliament successfully, to establish a national committee. And that national committee is the government committee you're talking about. And so, we are the ones who have driven this issue. And the government, of course, is already holding our document, which includes, as I said, a very elaborate piece on the coat of arms. And so we're very happy to see that our activism is bearing fruit.
So would you consider the fact that the government has the document from the Caribbean Freedom Project type of consultation and part of the consideration that led to this decision as announced by Dr. Rowley?
Well, as I said, we petitioned Parliament in 2020 to look critically at these things. We successfully did pass unanimously. Nobody in the Parliament objected to the idea. And then we kept the pressure on. I'll tell you something exclusively here that there's nowhere else. I mean, you all want to get into the details. We actually consulted with international human rights lawyers and considered genuinely, we wrote what we would call a pre-action protocol letter to the government, telling them that we'd be prepared to sue if they did not move the matter forward. We're a very serious organization, and I thought it would be very interesting to see if the government of Trinidad and Tobago or any Caribbean country, for that matter, would want to hold on to monuments that glorify racism and white supremacy and celebrate colonial violence.
What the pre-action protocol had indicated it would sue the government for?
Well, we were going to do something experimental. As I said, we've been consulting international lawyers and so on, and we felt that we would do one of those unprecedented cases. If the having raised the issue of monuments that, for example, you take a monument like Christopher Columbus. What you're celebrating with Christopher Columbus is the genocide of your indigenous people, and they still exist. You're also celebrating on his first voyage, his very first voyage, he started transporting people as against their will across the Atlantic. That is the dawn of the transatlantic trade in human beings or traffic in human beings. So Christopher Columbus is not just responsible personally for the invasion and occupation of the Caribbean and the initiation of indigenous genocide, but the initiation of another one of the great crimes in human history, or the crimes against humanity, two crimes against humanity, the transatlantic trade or traffic in human beings. And we're saying that having initiated a thing, we've had over 10,000 signatures to the mayor of Port of Spain. The mayor actually, we discovered that there was a meeting in the mayor's office, and in that meeting, the council voted to remove the statue of Columbus to the museum, and the mayor was the one who vetoed that, using his power to veto that. We felt that in these circumstances, we could make a legal case if the government was not going to move forward on the matter, and we would have indicated that to all those in authority. But let me tell you, right now, we really want to congratulate the government on moving this matter forward. Like the university back in 2017, when we challenged them on the issue of Milner, I think, when you just don't know that you're sitting down on something so egregious, it is one thing. But I think when anybody with a bit of genuine concern for this country and for the people of the Caribbean really understands what we are participating in, they move. And that's why I have no doubt that the Trinidadians who find this objectionable only find so because they just have no idea what they are involved in.
So an announcement like what was made by the Honorable Prime Minister Shabaka didn't come as a surprise to you at all?
Well, I felt certain for the last 2 years, and I mean, I would have said this publicly anywhere, that Columbus was gone. And I remember an old Indian gentleman on a show. It might have been Power 102. It might have not this station, but another host on this very same channel. We were having a discussion about 2 years ago, and an elderly Indian gentleman, after he became convinced by me that something was wrong with honoring and glorifying Christopher Columbus, he said, "So what do you expect to happen next? You're going to move he automatically made the link. He says, so you're going to move you're going to change the coat of arms?" And I just laughed. I didn't want to, I didn't feel it was the right moment to explain to him that, yes, it is an egregious sin to have the most important symbol in your country, celebrating such horrendous historical atrocities. you know, and of course it's an insult in particular to the indigenous people, and of course to anybody who knows what these symbols represent.
And you know, Shaka, Shabaka, sorry, you reminded me just now of that situation at the city council, because I was part of the city council that voted in favor of removing that Columbus statue. Can we expect then, because there's a new mayor now, can we expect a renewal of that proposal?
No, because that move that this when we moved towards petitioning Parliament, the matter was moved above the mayor. The mayor is no longer the one responsible for this matter. It's actually in the office of the Prime Minister in that committee. So that's where the matter resides. So it will not go back to the mayor. You know, I expect the consultations to begin shortly, and a lot of I don't think we're going to get every single thing that we advocate for, and that's not how it should be. Really, people should have a chance to, you know, look at things critically and to make decisions that they think are in the best interest of the country moving forward, but a significant portion of the things that we think are just and correct will happen.
Well, if you could, for the benefit of our listeners, tell us a few of those things. I know it had to do with street names in Port of Spain also too. I think Duke Street was one, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, indeed. In fact, I could just list them right here from the document in front of me. And I should really try to make this document available to you, gentlemen.
I was going to ask you if you could send it to us.
But what we have is the first thing, and the thing is the moral case for honoring Kwame Ture. Of course, Kwame Ture was born on that street, which we call Duke Street today. He was the third most important person in the civil rights movement in the United States of America before becoming one of the great revolutionaries of the 20th century and one of the greatest Pan-Africanists of the 20th century. The man who coined the term Black Power. He was banned from his country of birth for 28 years by the actual incumbent government, by the PNM, by Eric Williams. In fact, Williams was so paranoid about Kwame's power that he wouldn't allow him to land in Piapo Airport in transit. He was banned from touching the soil. Williams probably felt that people would meet him in the airport, and that might be too much. And so we feel that this government in particular has a role to play in, something, in terms of rewriting that historical wrong. The NAR government was the one that rescinded the ban. The Pandey government helped to pay his medical fees. The PNM government has not yet come forward to give Kwame Ture the degree of respect and to celebrate his name in such a way that he deserves. And of course, when we think about celebrating historical figures, we're not just thinking in terms of what they deserve, but in terms of the way that they can inspire another generation. So our Trinidadian, when you look at the way Trinidadians kind of move around, it's some of the more negative aspects of our conduct and so on. You can see the potential for us to benefit from knowing the best, the most courageous, the most brilliant of our ancestors, those who really, especially like Kwame Ture, who really graced the world stage. People like that, our children could benefit from knowing more about people like that. So we start off with Kwame Ture, and then we move into our committee's findings about the things that we need to remove. And at the top of the list is Christopher Columbus. Statues and places and anything named in his honor. He is the most sacred ritual. Worshipping Christopher Columbus I describe as one of the most sacred rituals of colonialism. It is at the center of what we call colonial epistemic violence. Everything else starts from there, and so Christopher Columbus is the first person on the list. From there, we moved to Thomas Picton and Ralph Abercrombie. And, we lumped them together because they were teammates. They actually came into the Caribbean the reason for coming into the Caribbean was to put down the revolutionary wars of emancipation that our people were raging in the second half of the 18th century. That's how they came into the Caribbean, and they did so quite successfully. In the process, they killed many of our greatest leaders across the region. They were supposed to move on from the English-speaking Caribbean into Haiti, but they were the Haitian Revolution was successful before they got there, and in that whole within that whole context, they ended up taking Trinidad, and Trinidad became a British colony, and of course. Picton became the first British governor of Trinidad, and one of the worst governors, one of the most brutal, vile, virulent governors in the history of this country. So those two.
Well, if you get through with Abercrombie, Paul 1 and 2 will have to change all the stationery.
This thing about changing stationery and thing. How does this work out? We're talking about confronting our past, coming to terms with who these people are, what we are celebrating. The colonials did a number on us, right? They've turned us into, we don't think about it too much, but foreigners who know the history come here and we are a laughing stock, because here we are, on one hand, calling for reparations. We are part of a Caribbean collective that is now seeking reparations for genocide of Native people and the enslavement of Africans. But we are publicly glorifying the people who are responsible for those great crimes on our streets.
Well, Shabaka, what does that tell you about? Two-part question. What does that tell you about the state of awareness? The state of awareness about the real history, because a lot of people believe the nonsense Columbus put in them in history books over the years, still believe it, and as fact, And part two of the question is, and this is something I disagree with, but it is something that's propagated over and over and over when these conversations start. Well, the history, good, bad, or ugly, is our history, and wiping out our history.
Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna give you a shocking fact about our history, and let's see if that could mobilize us to begin to understand what we're actually missing. I'm gonna give you two quick ones. One, in 1854, a Trinidadian by the name of Numa Diocese. He was wealthy. He had one drop or a couple drops of African blood in him. He would have been very light-skinned, probably past for white in Trinidad today. But he took 700 Trinidadians who were similarly would have been, majority of them would have been his type of Trinidadians, what we would have called free colored, some free blacks. 700 of them left this country to go to Venezuela to colonize, to set up a colony called Numancia. And Numa was a big businessman. He had property. He had he might have even had a newspaper. He had all kinds of other businesses. And he left a note saying, it is impossible for a person with one drop of black blood to find any degree of happiness in this country. And he was able to get 700 people to follow him to Venezuela to set up a colony. It was ultimately unsuccessful, but just their time in that part of the country gave birth to Venezuelan Calypso. And I could give you some examples of the but the point is that, nobody knows this story. Nobody understands what Numa would have experienced. Give you another example. In the Second World War, when the Americans set up a base in Trinidad, the British asked them not to send any what we call quote-unquote black troops. I don't like to use these words so casually, but they didn't want any African Americans to come to Trinidad. Why? They didn't want us. They were involved in a degree of they had exposed us to such adversity, to a kind of experiment in violence, where our calories were so low, our living standards were so low, that they did not want us to see an African American soldier, because these guys were much better fed, taller, bigger, stronger, clean, much better paid. And we're talking about African Americans now from the segregated, lynching South. They did not want us to see them because they were treating us so badly that they felt that the sight of them would have meant that we would have been able to see an African person like ourselves who was so much better off that we would start to question how we were being treated by the British. So this is the level of violence that we were exposed to post-emancipation. And all of this now is completely hidden from the people. I'll give you one last example for your listeners. Ask anybody to tell you the name of one slave master. Right? They're all around us, right? The names are everywhere, but nobody could tell you.
I could call the head of a conglomerate, but I won't.
The point I'm making is that nowhere in the teaching of our history are we taught, anything substantial about our past, right? If I were to ask anybody in this station that I could challenge this one, for sure I could challenge you guys too. Tell me where I could go in this country and find one implement of colonial violence that I could show my class. Tell me where I could find one whip. Tell me the building. CLR James said that the whip was delivered with more frequency than food on the plantation. Where could I find one to show the kids what they look like? You can't.
Well, it's interesting because I told Wendell and Richard and the audience, when I visited Ghana and went to what's the name of the place, Wendell? Elmina, and walked through that compound and walked into the room where my foreparents were huddled like cattle and put on the ship and had to huddle without food and water. It was so soul stirring because of the evidence, the physical evidence of the atrocities of slavery, that it actually, between feeling sick and feeling mind blown, is astounding. But what about the other part of the question? The typical response, well, it's an ugly history, but it's our history. And if we keep wiping out the statues, next thing we'll change Port of Spain from Port of Spain because this is not Spain, and daddy.
That is a testament to the success of colonial epistemic violence, or colonial violence enacted on or through knowledge. That is, it was successful. They did exactly what they wanted to do with us in the time that they had with us. They turned their heroes, the worst villains in our history, into our heroes. They made us worship the very people who committed the worst atrocities against our ancestors. And I would say to you that is both a sin and a shame in equal measure. And what the Prime Minister is doing now is beginning to correct that. And as soon as we wake up to understand that, we will understand that Prime Minister Rowley has written himself into the history books on the right side of history, and we will remember him for the next few hundred years. He was about.
Isn't it also a testament to the success of the indoctrination that, unfortunately, while it should be a symbol, and this is my opinion, people could do like it if they like, of real emancipation in a sense, or real freedom of thinking in a sense, it is now turned in by some quarters to an African versus East Indian thing.
Yeah, well, this is the nature of politics in this country. If Prime Minister Rowley says today, I no longer want to, I changed my mind, guys. We're going to keep the 3 ships. The opposition party is going to become the advocate of removing them. And they'll say, this man totish, this man think. This is the nature of Trinidadian politics. And if the PNM decided the day after that they would come back, and then the opposition would say, and that's really, really unfortunate. I don't know that has so much to do with our indoctrination as it has to do with our politics.
Yep, you're very right.
Yeah, I'll agree to that.
So
the issue of the politics and state symbols. And we were making the point earlier, Shabaka, that, you know, I'm of the view that it should have been a little bit more sober discussion on the issue and how he did it, rather than at a PNM rally, so to speak. Because it's still a state symbol.
Yeah.
And it should have a certain measure of reverence to that in terms of changing it. And so that you get some sort of, because you don't want that another government comes in power and say, well, we're changing it because we have a majority. And then another one comes back and say, well, we're changing it again because we have a majority. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So you need some sort of consensus.
Yeah. Richard, I don't always agree with you, but I always agree with your logic. I think that is very clear. You know, I think your point is well taken. I think the platform may not have been the best, you know, because in a sense, then it politicizes the issue.
Yeah.
But how do you think? What do you think are the next steps? Because Columbus's statue and the 3 ships are just part of a myriad of egregious symbolism that exists throughout Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension, the wider Caribbean. So how do you think this should evolve in, as Richard said, a sober, productive manner?
Well, let me say that, first of all, the wider Caribbean is moving ahead of us. You know, the very first attempt to remove this kind of symbolism was in 1954 in Guyana. And then the national poet laureate of Guyana, what was his name? Martin Carter, and another brother would have bombed the Queen Victoria statue. That would have been the first act of rebellion on the part of the people of the Caribbean against celebrating, glorifying the genocide of their native, you know, the native people and the enslavement of Africans, the colonization of the space, which would have included the indentureship of our Indian brothers and sisters, and the apartheid that followed post-emancipation. And so, you know, some of the other Caribbean countries have just done away with Columbus, like St. Lucia, for example. Whatever they named for Columbus, they just renamed it for Derek Walcott without much fanfare. You know, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you know, some of my colleagues over there are complaining about the pace of progress, but about a year now, the Prime Minister there, Ralph Gonsalves, said he was going to remove all of them. He said he wanted to use those spaces to honor the greats of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So we are, in fact, mere motley moved on monuments of that kind in Barbados. We are, in fact, just a little bit behind the curve here in Trinidad and Tobago. And I think that's the first part of the question. The second thing, what was the second part of the question? Forgive me.
The issue of how it should progress in Trinidad and Tobago, because the statues is one thing, but then there's so many, as you say, Picton Street, Abercrombie Street.
So I think that I lament what happened at the University of the West Indies to some extent. I don't think there was enough discussion and debate and dialogue to really help to move the students into an understanding of who Alfred Milner was and why it was important for us as a people, an independent people, to look critically at you know, what we were celebrating and glorifying in our public spaces. I don't think we did. The issue was aired enough at the university. I mean, of course, once the authorities there realized, you know, who Milner was, once we brought it to their attention, they were eager not to have to, you know, not to have that's, you know, become an international issue of, to bring the university into shame and disrepute. But but these are teaching moments, and if this proceeds in such a way that the society does not get a chance as a whole collectively to confront its past, to learn something about how it developed, to get a real sense of our history, then we would not have really benefited the way we should from this issue, at least the way I envisioned it when I started the project and launched it officially in 2017.
Yeah. How far do you think, because you have this committee that's set up now under the Office of the Prime Minister to look at it, and there's going to be a consultation process where people are going to put forward their arguments on whatever their lens through which they see the issue, and they're going to come forward. Are you confident that the government is going to act on the matter in alignment with what the Caribbean Freedom Project sees? Because I just want to use the reference of in a way, the constitutional reform, which was also consultative, and the current administration already whipping some of it out of the way and saying, no. So what's the purpose of consultation if it's just going to be whipped apart? No, almost arbitrarily.
Yeah, well, the reason that we set up a shadow committee is because we do not trust politicians generally. I've never gone into conventional politics, precisely because I have limited, I have my own concerns about the way politics operates. But what I would say is that we have taken that into consideration. We set up a shadow committee with, I think, enough luminary power, and we intend to send our national report to the United Nations. What would you call it, boy? There's a new body that was set up historically. I went to the first meeting, the historic meeting in Geneva. The African, there's a commission. Anyway, there's a number of international organizations that we've determined to send our report to, regional and international organizations. And so for some of the monuments, if we're not, there are going to be some that we consider to be, that we will not compromise on. And if we're forced to, we're going to continue to take action to continue to pressure anybody who's in power. We're not talking about PNM alone now. If this could move on to some other administration, we're going to pressure them to do what we think is right. But I think that the announcement by the Prime Minister signals that this government understands. You see, once you get to a point where you understand the past, you begin to, and you have the courage to confront it the way that the Prime Minister has, you find that, your will and moral character is going to choose to act. And so, I'm pretty confident.
You're pretty confident that you're going to get a lot of what you think needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I don't think, as I said, this was never about, it should never be about the opinions of any individual or group of people. What happens in a country should never be about that. So everything I want and so on shouldn't be an issue. But I'm saying that there are some things that we've determined are, beyond the pale, and that need to, for example, I'm sure there's going to be some pushback on Woodford, particularly because of how he's treated in our history. We have to thank him for the Queen's Park Savannah and how nice Port of Spain is, and the sidewalks and blah 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 and so on. So some people
I thought we had to thank God for the Queen's Park Savannah. And the indigenous people, I didn't know we had to thank Woodford for the Queen's Park Savannah.
Wait. There's gonna be some interesting pushback. They're gonna say that
we had to thank Woodford for the Queen's Park Savannah. You see the Queen's Park Savannah? You see how your mind's still caught up in it? You thank Woodford for the Queen's Park Savannah.
You're gonna hear that. This is the kind of conversation you're gonna hear coming up over the next couple of months. But we feel that even though Woodford contributed to the cathedral downtown and the Roman Catholic and the Anglican cathedrals and so on, we feel that he was one of the greatest white supremacists in our country's history. Mm-hmm. And we will in short measure, we will ask.
Why say we feel rather than we know?
Well, we know. I mean, oh God, this man. When we start to list the kind of positions and policies that Woodford enacted against people of color, is endless. It just don't make any sense listing them all. You have to pick, 10, 15 and put them in, and the litany is so long that it's impossible to list them all in one document. The man was he hated, people of color. He will not have a meal with you if he discovered you could look white with blonde hair and blue eyes, but imagine that one of your great grandparents had a drop of black blood. You could not sit at a table with Woodford.
Shabaka,
you might need to clarify. I just see a ridiculous question in the chat here, and this is just part of what we have to deal with in this beautiful milieu. And someone is actually asking, is Shabaka Kambon your birth name? Like, it's so out of this thought process that could actually be your birth name. And the question itself is so astounding to me.
Oh, God. That same doctorate person?
I like Trinidadians. Let me tell you something.
Well, the thing is that we do have, Dr. Brinsley Samaru was one of my close confidants right up until his passing. And he actually, when he died, we did not manage to get all his notes. He had a real long list of places in South and Central Trinidad that he felt very strongly had to be renamed, and he even, his rationales, went beyond some of the things that we had even considered. So it was a real loss to us that what we're trying to do now is to recover some of the spaces that Dr. Samaru indicated from the recordings of the meetings, because he was supposed
to. Why do you think a lot of his people like him, not only him, but people like him and their works are not celebrated? I had the honor to interview Dr. Samaru on 3 occasions. And in one, he presented a thesis to me that even the British colonial masters' insistence that our independence was predicated on the fact that we adopt this Westminster system that was designed to keep us African versus Indian in the way it was handed down to us. Mm-hmm. People don't hear about that and how brilliant these theses are in terms of what we're experiencing today as a country.
Yeah, so I think Brinsley would have experienced what some of the Black Power African, because you had African, Indian, and white Black Power revolutionaries. I just had a celebration this weekend where we celebrated Sister Intu Springer, Ivan Lachlan, and my father. And of course, Ivan would have been the, a white Trinidadian, Lachlan. And he would have very much been part of that Black Power generation. And he would have marched to Caroni and so on. So you have, that generation, what they would have experienced within the African community is the same thing that Brinsley would have experienced in the Indian community. When you jump ahead of, and I'm going to use the term Negroes now. Negroes not meaning African people, but Negroes is a slur. It's a term synonymous with slave. When you have the opportunity to turn somebody from a free person through the violence, the physical violence and the mental violence, to adopt your worldview, an imperialist worldview, even though they are the ones who are oppressed in the system, we call them Negroes in the African community. And you have Indian Negroes and African Negroes who, have according to Leroy Clark, they've drunk the hot molten bronze, and they've become like domesticated animals. They reflect the views of their former masters. And, and you have them on both sides. And if an Indian or an African person comes forward with a different perspective that comes forward to challenge the ideas that they've been given by their former masters, they will critique them in the worst way. They will attack them. They will undermine them. They will try to eviscerate them from the public space.
Shabaka Kambon, his birth name, for those of you asking. Thank you for being with us.
Well, that's actually an interesting story. Yeah? So Shabaka I would have been from that generation. I was given the name Shabaka at birth. But do you know what I discovered one day? That my father's name had not been officially changed yet when I was born. So it really, it's as it seems like a funny question. It's funny to me. I only discovered this a few years ago. As I tried to get my documents right.
It's funny to me as well. The question is quite loaded, but thank you for being with us this morning.